Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my Tomb King army guide for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaigns. In the early game of the Tomb Kings, you're going to be severely limited in terms of the variety of troops, as well as the number of armies. It does get a lot more interesting later on once you start talking about tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 even, or once you do start capturing more and more settlements. Also remember that you do have a right that allows you to take over a settlement or ruin settlement as tier 3. You could even abandon a settlement and make it tier 3. But anyway, with the discussion about Tomb Kings, usually speaking, I would recommend if you have literally nothing else to recruit, gang a bunch of skeletal spearmen. They have a silver shield, they have a charge defense versus large, they have charge reflection, they have that bonus versus large benefit, so they're good flank protectors in your campaign, as well as providing you line holding capability, or the only line holding capability that you have access to early on in a campaign. Beyond that, though, you will be able to get a bunch of Nehekaran warriors very, very quickly in your campaign. So one of the things I do personally is get a bunch of barracks, tier 1, tier 2, just get as many barracks as you possibly can at those tiers, like tier 1 and tier 2, get barracks, start pumping out Nehekaran warriors as well as other units, but basically these are the guys you're going to be using for the first couple of turns, or recruiting for the first couple of turns. They do cause fear, they do have a bonus versus infantry. They're quote-unquote a damage dealer. Their leadership and armor isn't the best in the world, but they can hold their own against a number of early game opponents. Just be aware of Forik if you're dealing with him. And then we have skeletal archers. Not the best archer unit in the world, not in terms of leadership, not in terms of damage, but it is an archer unit. And the more important benefit of archers is with regards to sieges. Because yes, Tomb Kings can get at least one artillery unit very quickly in their campaign, but you will still want archer units to be able to handle the siege situation that you're going to be dealing with. So this is kind of like a very early game Tomb King army that you can easily recruit with just a handful of settlements that you conquer within the first few turns. In fact, this is how your secondary army might look like. Your Legendary Lord army is going to be chock full of, the Casket of Souls, for instance, as well as potentially, better units, dependent on the tier of settlements that you start with. But for a secondary army, this is what you would be looking at. Now, of course, you only have a lord choice. Maybe Lords of the End Times is going to change that around. The Tomb King, what I would say with regards to Tomb Kings as lords is that the special ones are better to recruit. So when you're researching an extra army, one of the things I would recommend getting right after is the dynasty leader associated with that specific dynasty. They have certain extra benefits, and Tomb Kings by default have a Lord skill line choice that might be limited for the generic version, but not so limited for those dynasty leader. Now, hero-wise in a Tomb King campaign, you're usually going to be able to get a Tomb Prince, if not starting with the Tomb Prince, fairly easily. But Tomb Princes are kind of the lowest priority for you to focus on. Obviously, their melee capability on the battlefield is useful, as well as certain skill line choices, but it is really with Necrotechs and Lich Priests that you want to focus that very early hero capacity, that limited hero capacity, because you do need canopic jars in order to increase hero capacity through research, if you're going to focus on it, and it was as well as research turns. Now, Katep and Arkhan can get Lich Priests pretty quickly, but Cetra and Khalida can have an issue with that. The benefit, of course, with Lich Priests is they give you casualty replenishment. The magic benefit itself is not as significant, nowhere near as significant as the casualty replenishment benefit that these guys provide. And then we have Necrotects. Now, in terms of combat capability, Necrotects are not good. But the various unit capacities, as well as construct benefits that these guys provide, means that leveling up a Necrotect, or several of them, very quickly in your campaign is going to be a huge benefit. Basically, you want all the heroes of the Tomb Kings, but the priority, I would say, getting 1 or 2 Lich Priests pretty quickly, very beneficial for the sake of casualty replenishment. Necrotects, hugely beneficial because of what they offer you in terms of the midterm and even long term with like the big constructs, tier 4 constructs. But if you're looking at Yolosapien, if you're looking at cavalry, in Tomb King campaign, Tomb Scorpions, these guys are really worth investing in. For a tier 2 army, or more realistically a tier 2 army, when we have a bunch of tier 2 settlements to increase unit capacity, or barracks to increase unit capacity, you would be looking at something like this. You could even get rid of the archers completely and just go full on melee with the Tomb Kings if you can afford an Hekaran warrior capacity. But this is where you start getting that kind of unit variety that Tomb Kings do have. So first off, we have Tomb Guard. Yes, I know Tomb Guard can have severe limitations on unit capacity, but a couple of things to mention on this. One, you can get a book that gives you a huge amount of Tomb Guard capacity in your campaign, so you might be running around with quite a few of them. In fact, you might not even want to recruit Hekaran warriors in a campaign. You might have more Tomb Guard than you can afford really for your armies, especially if you get a tier 3 settlement very, very quickly. But we're taking this by tiers. So Tomb Guard, Silver Shields, decent enough weapon strength, decent enough leadership. They're your principal infantry, or one of your principal infantry. Obviously, the halberd version is the better one, but halberds do require tier 3 in order to increase capacity and in order to recruit in the first place. So, since you will have a lot more tier 2 settlements than tier 3 ones, then getting a bunch of Tomb Guards for like secondary, tertiary armies is very much worth it compared to Hekaran warriors. They're just flat out the better unit to have in a campaign. Then we have skeletal archer chariots. 1 or 2 units per army. Now here's the thing about skeletal archer chariots. They have the same melee stats as melee chariots, but they also have ranged attack. The benefit of the ranged attack is that you can set up a defensive position on a section of the battlefield, corner camping, or whatever formation you want to use. And if the enemy AI is playing defensive, you can send one of these units or 2 of these units to harass them, and then they'll eventually attack. On top of that, you can also peel off a portion of the enemy army so that your main line is not engaging as many units. Like, you can get 3, 4, maybe more units to chase you down. And on top of that, once those lines are engaged, you can also throw these guys into melee. They're not the best melee chariots. The reasoning behind that is because they, one, their charge bonus is not necessarily the best. Their melee stats are not necessarily the best either. Though they have a decent level of durability, as well as having too many entities per unit. Like, there's pathfinding problems with chariots beyond 4 entities per unit. It is an issue across the board in the game, but having 1 or 2 of these can be useful. Though obviously their value in a siege situation is going to be extremely limited. Then we have Yolosapien. Now, Yolosapien, many different ways of increasing Yolosapien capacity in a campaign. Obviously the Great Bow version is the better one. Like, a lot of tier 2 units are just kind of like the lead up to the tier 3 version. But when you look at Yolosapien, they have armor piercing weapon damage, they have a bonus versus infantry, they have 90 armor. You can put these guys into the middle of your infantry front line, and they can support it, or they can go on their own to deal with enemy units. They're really good at dealing with low-level enemy infantry. So if you're dealing with Manfred, or you're dealing with a lot of vampire counts, which I suppose is going to become an even bigger issue with Lord's End times, then getting Yolosapien is generally really the thing to go. Like, when I'm playing a Tomb King campaign, I might not get the chariot building until I get to tier 3. Or I might not get a couple, more than, say, one of them. But I will definitely start investing into getting as many Yolosapien as I can, dependent on the building slot situation. Because they're just that damn useful. Yolosapien are also pretty decently fast for a monstrous infantry unit, and they can really hold their own. So yeah, like, this is a kind of tier 2 army, like, again, secondary army. Primary army, you know, it's gonna have a Casket of Souls, it's gonna have your legendary lords, it's probably gonna have most of your heroes even. Like, I just keep adding heroes here to represent an ideal, but realistically, a lot of your secondary and tertiary armies throughout your Tomb King campaigns are probably going to be running with 1 or 2 heroes at most, and even that's going to take some investment to get going. Now, in terms of tier 3 as the ideal, again, it is realistically the ideal. You do have Tomb Guards with halberds. They lose weapon strength, but they gain armor-piercing weapon damage and bonus versus large. In fact, if there is a choice in a campaign between regular Tomb Guard and Tomb Guard with halberds, you should always go with Tomb Guard with halberds. But, given the way unit capacity works, like, yeah, Cetra can get a lot of Tomb Guard capacity with halberds even, but everyone else kind of not so much. So it's really a question of how many you have, how do you want to spread them around. I would say having at least 2 of them in an army for the sake of flank protection, if nothing else, can be extremely useful, and then you can rely on regular Tomb Guard and Yolosapien to hold the line. But then we have choices, really, because this is the thing about Tomb Kings. You do have choices. One of the units you can get at tier 3 are Necropolis Knights. These are a pretty good cavalry unit, heavily armored, yes, bronze shield only, but they do have poison attacks, they do have armor-piercing weapon damage, they're pretty decently durable. They're the equivalent of Demigryph Knights for the Tomb Kings. And the same building that you get them from the same tier, you might only want to get the cavalry building chain from your provincial capitals, but you do get Sepulchre Stalkers. Now, the way I would treat these guys is kind of like blunderbusses with regards to their ranged weaponry. Firing arcs can be a problem, undeniably so, with regards to these guys. So range capability, like, if they hit enemy targets, they can do a good amount of damage because of that armor-piercing, magical damage, and they're no slouches in melee either. 80 armor, anti-large, armor-piercing magical attacks. But they're more of a specialist unit. You don't want to get too many of these, though you can get a good amount of capacity with Necrotects, specifically for Sepulchre Stalkers, once you get to a certain level with them. This is the reason you want to invest in Necrotects in a campaign, because they can give you a lot of different unit capacity that is going to be incredibly useful. And it's certainly better to get a couple of Sepulchre Stalkers than just a bunch of Nehekharan Warriors or Tomb Guards in a campaign. Sure, Yolosapien, always great, but there's never going to be enough Yolosapien to go around in a campaign, unfortunately. Then we have Tomb Scorpion. So as a tier 3 single entity unit, I do really like these guys. They have a decent level of durability, poison attacks, armor piercing, bonus versus infantry, and because they're so low on the ground, they actually avoid one of the big issues a lot of single entities do have in a campaign, which is that they're vulnerable to range fire. These guys are not going to be vulnerable to range fire. They have that spell resistance. They're quite very useful in terms of anchoring a line, supporting a line, or just going around and causing havoc among the enemy. Then we have Yolosapien with great bows. Like, really, once you can get a decent amount of these, or even 2 of these in an army, you might just forget all about skeletal archers in an army. They have armor-piercing missiles. They're quite capable of doing a tremendous amount of damage, on an enemy from a very good range. Their projectiles might not be the most accurate against like small single entities like this Imperial General, but against enemy units, against big single entities, they are quite effective. Like, just have one of these guys. I really should have brought Scarbrand as an opponent over here to showcase this in a battle, just how effective these guys can be at hitting something like Scarbrand, or, you know, just enemy units in general. Then we have Screaming Skull Catapults. This is the unit that you get the chariot building for, basically. Limited capacity, so while it would be great to have like even 3 or 4 of these guys in an army, you're realistically only going to go with 1 of them, and even then it is an investment to get them, but they are quite effective. Magical attacks, good range, good level of damage, armor piercing, and also reducing enemy leadership by 8, which is quite a substantial amount when you look at difficulty modifiers. For instance, 8 is a pretty big level. And then the only unit in a Tomb King campaign that is limited and actually not disposable, Casket of Souls. Like, you might sacrifice an entire army just to keep the Casket of Souls alive, because it does take a rite, and it does take 10 turns cooldown to get it there. But they have a huge level of range, they have a huge level of damage. What is there to be said about Casket of Souls that one doesn't like? And Katep especially is ridiculous because he has 1 as a mount, so he doesn't need it in his army, so you can just put that in another army. But yeah, ideally, every single army eventually would get the Casket of Souls. They would just do phenomenally well in every single battle. Accuracy can be an issue sometimes, and, you know, line of sight issues sometimes as well for quite a few battles, but you're going to be dealing with a lot of sieges. These are great in sieges. And since Tomb King artillery is limited, you want to make the most out of the few pieces that you have. Like, you're never going to have enough Screaming Skulls and Casket of Souls as you want, so these are the few units, or at least caskets, that you want to protect. Screaming Skulls you can always replace as long as you have the recruitment structure, but caskets are difficult to do so. So, realistically, in a campaign, to be quite honest on the subject, this is kind of the thing you're going to aim for. Maybe even more Ushabti with great bows. Like, if you're looking for an army that is ideal for a campaign when it's actually relevant, this is something akin to what you'd want to go for. Every single hero type, a bunch of Tomb Guards with halberds, a bunch of Ushabti, some cavalry, some Tomb Scorpions. Not everything is important. Like, you can get rid of Necropolis Knights, you can even get rid of Tomb Scorpions and just go Ushabti, Tomb Guard, and Screaming Skulls if you want to. But if you want a decent level of variety, and it's available, the unit capacity, again, for necrotechs, for research, for various landmarks, is there. Finally, in terms of some of the luxury options in a Tomb King campaign, well, first off, you have Necropolis Knights with halberds. These are not really a luxury item because you can get a decent amount of capacity for them. It's just that tier 4 building requirement that makes them a bit tricky to get in a campaign when it's relevant. But if you can get them, they're generally worth it. Sure, they lose the shield, but they have armor piercing bonus versus large, quite a bit of bonus versus large. They're an anti-cav cav. So these guys, they'll hold their own against pretty much any cavalry unit in the game. Sure, when you look at Skull Crushers or Chaos Knights, potentially, that is a bit of a discussion, especially against Skull Crusher. I'm not sure they would be able to win, but all the same. Otherwise, yeah, Ushabti are always useful, though you could just get rid of them if you have enough constructs in a campaign. But the question is, are you going to have enough constructs? Or you could try and just get a bunch of Ushabti Grey Bows and annihilate the enemy from range. This is the reason why Tomb Kings kind of have the best army roster of all undead factions, because it's like, hey, you want to annihilate your opponent from melee? You can do so. You have the ability to do so. You want to have good cavalry? You do have that. You want to have good artillery? You have that. You want to annihilate the enemy in range? You can do so. But let's talk about the 4 big constructs. So you have Hierotitans, Necrosphinxes, War Sphinxes, and Bow Giants. So Bone Giants, they can do a lot of damage as a kind of mobile artillery piece, or, you know, a big single entity artillery piece. Though accuracy can sometimes be, let's just say, a bit questionable with regards to that. But the damage of these guys hit, it's certainly there. It's not my favorite unit to increase capacity for, but because, yeah, if it hits, it's great. But if it doesn't hit, well, tough shit. Then we have Higher Titans. So Higher Titans, like, kind of the equivalent of Giants for the Tomb Kings. They do have bounce spells. They do have a good amount of damage, flaming attacks, magical attacks, armor-piercing weapon damage. But again, not my favorite unit of the constructs because, one, it's slow, and two, it's a big hulking target that can be targeted by pretty much anything. And it's like enemy range can do it, and most melee units will definitely outpace this guy in a battle. So yeah, the better choices are War Sphinxes or Necrosphinxes. Now, here's the difference essentially. War Sphinxes have a ranged attack available as well, but they sacrifice some of their melee capability compared to Necrosphinxes. Obviously on Lords, you do want this mount, even on Cetra. You don't want the Chariot on Cetra, you want the War Sphinx. But generally speaking, if you're going to invest in any kind of construct capacity or high-end construct capacity, it would be Necrosphinxes. But this is the great thing about Tomb Kings. They get these units at tier 4. And these are the big single entities that other races would have at tier 5. They get them at tier 4, and that is immensely beneficial. Of course, you can get a wide variety of them, but if you're going to invest in anything, yeah, I would definitely go with Necrosphinxes as a kind of luxury item. If there is a unit that you want in a battle that can definitely turn the tide, it's these guys. Their speed, their melee capability, their survivability, their damage just makes them incredibly useful as units. Less charge bonus, sure, than War Sphinxes, the giant construct cat, if you will. So these guys are a bit better at cycle charging. But in terms of stand-up fighting capability, definitely I would go for Necrosphinxes as opposed to War Sphinxes. Also that bonus versus large. So don't expect them to do so well against... I mean, you can consider it an anti-single entity benefit. Cavalry-wise, that's a bit iffy, though surprisingly their speed actually makes them capable enough of giving cavalry a bit of a chase, if you will. So don't underestimate Necrosphinxes in any way, shape or form. And that's all I had to say about the Tomb Kings. Costin here signing out. Hopefully things will be changed around with Lord's End Times, and we'll see what kind of variety they have, like Camric Titans maybe. We'll find out. Stay tuned.